We paid $100 to stay in an empty town, and the dog wagged its tail in front of a lit meter like it was greeting an old friend. That's the truth of it, plain as a paper receipt and twice as ugly in the moonlight. I had the receipt in my pocket, still warm from the little roadside kiosk. County seal stamped in purple, a signature I couldn't read, and a warning in block letters. Enter at your own risk. Folks might call me a fool for paying to sleep where everybody left, but I ain't rich, and sometimes the cheapest bed is the one nobody wants. My dog, a big-shouldered German shepherd with dusk-colored fur and gold eyes, didn't share my doubts. He saw that glass meter glowing on the wall of the old mercantile and wagged like a porch fan in July, and I swear the needle twitched like it wagged back. The place had a name once, Dove's Rest, and it sounded like a sigh when you said it. The sign still hung over Main, letters faded to bone. Storefront windows wore a skin of dust so fine it made halos around our lantern. The saloon door rocked easy in the same breeze that moved the tumbleweeds. Someone had swept the wooden walk not long ago and laid down a stripe of water to kill the dust, which made no sense in a dead town unless the dead had learned housekeeping. I set my pack down and listened to the kind of quiet that don't trust you yet. The dog lifted his nose, took in a long breath of creosote and old varnish, and shot me that look he uses when something small is trying to hide itself by making a big show. "Easy, Ranger," I said. He flicked an ear, then padded to the mercantile wall and pressed his nose to the meter's glass. The little wheel inside spun so slow you could count its pride. Lit up too, single blue eye under a crooked brow of dust. I rubbed the back of my neck. "You seein' it, boy?" He wagged once, and his tail knocked a little rhythm on the clapboard. There was power where power shouldn't be, and if you've drifted through enough counties, you learn the simple rule. Ghost stories don't burn down towns. Men with reasons do. We bedded down in the old rooming house across from the mercantile because the porch held. The boards sang like they remembered music, and the front door, though it leaned like a tired man, had a latch that bit true. Inside smelled of pine soap that had fought a losing war. My lantern found the registry desk and a bell with a moth folded under it like a hymn note. On the wall hung a photo of the town in its Sunday best. Women in bright dresses, men in clean hats, everybody looking like they'd survived the week together. The glass was cracked across the faces, a thin silver river running from the church steeple to the edge. I liked the place for that. Even the damage aimed true. I laid out my bedroll under the stairs where it felt like the house could tuck me in. Ranger did his own survey, sniffing corners, checking the kitchen, pushing once at the door marked "store." With the kind of firm, polite insistence he shows cows that won't make up their mind. He came back carrying a torn receipt in his teeth and dropped it in my palm. New paper, fresh ink, yesterday's date. Someone had bought 30 feet of copper wire, a padlock, and 2 baggies of nails. I didn't care much for the feeling that settled in behind that. You know a ghost by the cold it leaves. You know a man by the mess. This had smudges where a thumb tried to clean them and failed. I heard a piano key plink from over at the hotel. A single note like a throat clearing, then nothing. That was enough to put me on my feet. "Stay," I told Ranger, which he obeyed the way any good partner does. He translated it as quiet and walked a half step behind me instead of ahead. We crossed the street slow. From the edge of my lantern, I could see the church doors were gapped, and a strip of bright dust lay poured like salt along the sill. Meanwhile, that meter glowed behind us like a watchful eye. I found myself turning back every few breaths like it was a person I'd been rude to. We stepped into the hotel and found it tidy in that too careful way you get when the same pair of hands has done it all. Chairs tucked, rugs straight, a vase on the counter with 3 yellow weeds standing like they'd passed the job interview. There was a piano by the bay window. I touched a key and it gave the same lonely note I'd heard outside, which made me realize how long a sound can carry in a town with no heartbeat to soak it up. Ranger circled the back of the instrument, then stopped with his tail high, nose pointing at the bottom panel. He looked over at me like he was waiting for permission to be a dog. "Go on," I told him. He tapped once with a paw. The panel rocked and fell inward with a sigh of dust. Behind it sat a little wooden box with slits on the side. Looked like a birdhouse with no kindness. A thin wire ran out of it and under the floor. I leaned down, put my ear to the slit, and heard a whisper of recorded wind, the cheap sort, pressed on tin that comes in a loop. I cut the wire with my pocket knife. The wind died mid-sigh, and the silence that followed wasn't spooky at all. It was honest, and I could breathe in it. "Whoever set that up wanted folks to hear what they came for," I said. Ranger sneezed, which is his way of agreeing with philosophy. We followed the wire to a trapdoor in the hall, where it joined. A family of other wires headed under the boards, quiet as cattle, heading for water before dawn. I couldn't see where they all led, but the whole thing felt like a poorly kept secret, the kind that isn't meant to fool anyone with a memory longer than a day. I'd seen outfits like this, roadside hauntings, phantom barns, glow-in-the-dark warnings, gussied up to sell tours or keep the curious out. They never scared me long, just made me tired. Back on Maine, the moon had gone from nickel to bone-white dollar, and the shapes of buildings had edges you could trust. That lit meter kept on with its steady glow. "You still watching us?" I asked it. A foolish thing to ask a clock on the wall, but I've said worse to less interesting furniture. Ranger trotted to the alley between the mercantile and the feed store, stopped, then looked over his shoulder at me with his head tilted the way he does when he's found just enough truth to need help. I followed. Halfway down the alley's dust turned darker and held a shoeprint neat as a stamp. It was small and sharp at the toe, like it belonged to a woman who believed in walking wherever she said she'd be. I thought of the registry desk and the tidy rooms and the weed flowers that had stood at attention. Some hands had kept this place, and not out of love for tourists or me. We came out behind the hotel and saw light in a second-floor window tilt and lower like someone had set down a lamp to tie a shoe. I raised my lantern, and the light died as cleanly as if it had been ashamed. I felt more awake than I had in days. "Evening," I called, because there's comfort in the sound of a voice that ain't hiding. "We paid $100 to stay in your empty town, so I figure we own a sliver of this night. You got company?" The window stayed quiet. Then, after the kind of pause that's either fear or thinking, the front door opened and a woman stepped into the hall light. She was tall and neat, with midnight hair pulled tight and a dress the color of untroubled cream. In a place this worn down, she looked like she'd been poured in yesterday from a cleaner world. She didn't smile. She did not look scared either, which was near enough to an introduction for me. "Iris Beaumont," she said. Her voice had sand in it, the gentle kind that knows the road but keeps the polish. "This place is closed." "Sold a ticket at the county kiosk, said otherwise." I touched the brim of my hat because my mother raised me to mind my hands. "Name's Bill Maddox. This is Ranger. He's got questions about your light bill." Her gaze went past me to the meter, which still threw its soft blue on the clapboard like a ghost trying to be tender. "That old thing," she said, and something in the way she said it told me she'd said it before to someone who had the authority to ignore her. "It's not hooked to any house, just spins to keep the story alive." "What story is that?" I asked. "The one that keeps folks from settling back in." She leaned on the doorframe the way you'd lean on a fence when you were tired of standing brave. "You're not the first fellow to come looking for a night you can boast about later. Usually, they want whispers and doors that shut themselves. I make coffee, keep rooms swept, and let the wind help with the rest. It buys me time." "For what?" "To hold this place long enough that somebody with a better claim than greed remembers it." She looked at Ranger and softened a little, like a candle remembering its first use. "He's handsome. Don't let him hear it, or he'll add it to his list of duties," I said. Ranger wagged once with professional restraint. "We're not here to make trouble. We just notice something that don't fit. The lines are still live. Somebody's drawing power and hiding the draw. At that, a shutter banged at the church like an amen that came late. Iris lifted her chin towards the edge of town. There's a substation out past the North Windmill. Folks say it died same day the school did. I reckon it's like anything else. A thing can look dead and still be made to work if the right pair of hands insists. She paused, then added, there's a man calls himself historian who manages to show up whenever fear needs feeding. Name. Elias Crozier, she said. The way the name sat on her tongue made me think of a pebble lodged in a boot, small, mean, there for too long. He brings in a little bus now and then, tells stories about miners that never were, and widows that won't leave, collects cash, promises it's for preservation. Does he preserve the meter? I asked. She almost smiled. He preserves whatever glows. We stood a while in that street like we were listening to a child sleep. The wind pushed the weeds into a quiet rhythm. A moth came to the lantern, fell in love with it, then forgot. Ranger yawned, the long evening yawn that means he is gathering himself for work. I felt the town begin to sort me into friend or stranger, and I hoped I'd land on the side that kept me fed. I paid my 100, I said finally. I'll earn it by fixing what's honest to fix, long as you don't mind me laying hands. On wire, I don't mind if you don't mind the company, she said. I'm not much of a ghost, but I do patrol. She glanced down at her dress as if apologizing to it for the duty. Then she picked up a lantern of her own and held it like a decree. Come morning, Mr. Maddox. You'll understand why a town that's empty is still heavy. Ranger was already moving, tail up, yearning for the alley again. The meter hummed behind us, barely there, like a fly behind glass. We followed the dog, who followed the wire, which followed the lie. And the night followed us all, waiting to hear the truth spoken out loud so it could finally sit down and rest. Iris Beaumont walked us through the rooming house like a curator who'd sworn to protect what she loved by making it look ordinary. She carried her lantern low, a bright almond of light that carved gold out of the grey. Up close, she was prettier. In that unarguable way, clean water is pretty. Sharp lines, calm eyes, the kind of posture that meant nobody ever had to ask her twice. In the town, rubbed down to threads, she was a fresh seam. Ranger liked her right off. He trotted at her hip like he'd known her when she was 10 and the world had told her to act 13. I knew better than to ask why she stayed. A woman who keeps flowers alive in a drought deserves not to be cross-examined after supper. Rooms are set, she said. Sheets are dry, kitchen's straight. Boiler's a stubborn mule. If we need hot water, we sweet-talk it. She touched the brass banister with the back of her hand, testing its temper the way you test a horse you ain't sure of. You said wire. I've been seeing wire where wire shouldn't sit. Under the piano, under the hall, I said, and the church has wind that doesn't ask the sky. That box, she said, wasn't mine. Came one afternoon while I was down at the well, and by the time I came up, the floorboards had a fresh cough to 'em. I ain't got a badge. I got a broom and a jaw. Neither arrests a man who thinks he's got history on his side. History's just a fence somebody set where it suited 'em, I said. She almost smiled. You talk like you ain't afraid of ghosts. I'm afraid of bills. I put a hand to the wall. The wood was warm. And I'm afraid of paying. $100 to sleep in a place that says it's empty, while the meter across the street glows like it's counting heartbeats. Ranger left us for the kitchen and came back with a look that meant he'd found 2 truths and 1 lie. He stood beside a swinging door, nose pointed at the seam near the floor, tail high but still. I knelt, pressed a knuckle to the crack, and felt a breath of warm air, steady as a sleeping animal. I pushed through. The kitchen wore its hard years neat. Knives clean, coal bucket heaped, a calendar stopped on a month that matched no season I could remember. But the stove had a new gas line, and the cellar door had been rehung by someone who used a level and a prayer. We opened the cellar on 4 steps, and the smell of iron. Iris held the lantern and I went first, Ranger crowding my knees with a polite urgency. On the packed earth floor, someone had chalked a rectangle and set 4 milk crates on the corners, like crude saints. On one crate sat a battery the size of a suitcase, black and full of ideas. Cables ran to a switch tied on with twine. From there, 2 wires disappeared into a crack in the foundation. The stack looked temporary in the way things do when you want to believe you can carry them away at a moment's notice and leave no trace except the clean spot where they sat. Crozier, I asked. If it were him, there'd be a brochure, Iris said, but I reckon he pays whoever set this and then pays himself twice. She lifted the lantern higher. Look there. Ranger was pouring at a biscuit tin. Inside, we found a ledger no bigger than a hand, wrapped in brown paper that had been opened and closed until the fibers remembered every fold. No names, no addresses, just dates, figures, and little triangles that pointed up or down like weather signs. Every few pages, there was an initial V and a smear that could have been grease or not wanting to write the rest. I could hear the substation in the page, a far-off hum knit into the numbers like a lullaby sung through grit. V for Virgil? I asked, thinking of a man I'd met once at a feedlot. Soft voice, hands blunt as fence posts, eyes that didn't wonder. Iris didn't answer right away. She was squinting at a column of triangles that went down and then held flat, like a breath held too long. He used to work the county lines, she said. When the school shut down, he shut his mouth and came here. Said he was looking out for the bones of the place. Said the creek belonged to whoever loved it enough not to poison it. Said a lot of brave things in a careful tone. You trust him? I don't not trust him, she said, which in some counties is the same as a handshake delivered with both hands. He keeps to the north edge, comes late, leaves early. I've seen him fix a hinge without standing on the porch long enough to call it a visit. We set the ledger back, where Ranger couldn't snack it by accident, then followed the fat wires to the foundation crack. You could hear something beyond the wall, water or a cousin of water wearing a machine's shoes. I put my cheek to the mortar. A faint vibration came up through my teeth. Whoever had drawn power out here was doing it with the quiet grace of a pickpocket and the stubbornness of a windmill that doesn't care how little wind you bring it. Let's trace the other end, I said. We came up from the cellar and out onto Main. The night had settled into that kind of peace that isn't a promise so much as a standoff. The meter at the Mercantile blinked its blue eyelid. Ranger loped. Ahead, paused at the alley, then kept on past it with purpose. He took us behind the feed store, across a patch of ground where old barrels had left rust rings like moons, and along the fence line to a gate that had been painted to look like it wanted to be locked. It wasn't. The chain wore its padlock, the way a scarecrow wears a hat, convincing from a distance, foolish up close. Beyond the gate, the path cut a seam through brush and washed out ruts. The north windmill stood with its back broken, but the tail still knew where north was. Past that, the substation hunched like a cow that hadn't forgiven the winter. Half its panels were gone. The ones that remained looked like they were learning to pray. And yet a low sound came off it. Not exactly a hum, more the memory of one, like somebody whistling after they forgot the tune. Ranger's ears went forward as if the night had spoken his name. You smell him? I asked. Ranger's answer was to sit. That's his way of saying, if we go gentle. We went gentle. Iris slipped beside me, lantern shaded with her palm. A shape stepped out from the shadow of the panels. A man tall enough to borrow the night and broad enough to have earned it. He wore his hat like he had paid full price for it and didn't owe anyone the time of day. When he spoke, the words came careful, each one set down where it could be found again. I reckon you're the pair that cut the hotels. Whisper, he said. Didn't mean to break your wind, I replied. Just didn't like being lied to while I was paying rent. I can respect that. He looked at Iris, not at her dress, but at the light she held. "Miss Beaumont, you keeping the ledger safe?" "Safe as I can," she said. "We ain't hiding thieves tonight, are we, Virgil?" Virgil Pike came the rest of the way into the half-moon light. He had a face that had been honest too long to learn a different habit. "Depends what you call theft," he said. "I've been siphoning a little from a line that forgot its people. Not to sell, to keep the pumps alive enough. That the creek don't go to silt. Crozier wants the town empty so he can own the story. A dead town is cheaper to buy. A living creek is expensive to kill." "You working alone?" I asked. He looked down at Ranger. "Looks like 4 of us out here to my count," he said. "But no. There's a bus comes once a week with a sweet paint job and a belly full of fear. I've seen his boys run cable, like snakes under doors. They stage their hauntings, shake the tin cup, then tidy up just enough to make it look like the ghosts respected the place." "You let them?" Iris asked, anger brightening her voice like a match touched to lamp. "Oil. I let them put on their show while I keep this yard breathing," he said. "I ain't got a badge either, but I got a wrench, and I got a sense of when to stay ugly so something else can stay beautiful." He tapped the metal casing with 2 fingers. "If I cut every line tonight, Crozier would laugh in daylight and bring a generator by noon. If I keep the old heart thumping, the county can't declare this carcass. That buys me time to gather proof that even a timid judge won't spit out." I'd known men who dressed their excuses in noble clothes, but this didn't smell like that. It smelled like a fence fixed in the rain with a bar of soap for grease because you didn't have the right oil and wouldn't wait. It smelled like a man who'd figured out that a lie can sometimes be tripped by a smaller lie, wearing a better hat. "You got proof?" I asked. Virgil reached into the panel and brought out a strip of Polaroids. In the flash pop frames, I saw the birdhouse speakers, the shimmer wires Iris hadn't had time to yank, the tour bus with a silver decal of a raven. Carrying a key, men setting up trip lines in the church so the doors would sigh as if a widow had passed. The last frame was the meter itself, blue as a vein. There was a glove on the hand pointing at it, and the glove had a brand new brand burned into the leather, Crozier Council. "Council?" I asked. "Just him," Virgil said, "but it looks bigger on paper." Iris exhaled through her nose, the way a horse does when it is done being patient. "We can't win this in the dark," she said. "He sells the night, let's buy the morning." "Meaning?" I asked. "Meaning we make a list," she said. "We cut the wires that talk. We leave the ones that breathe. We mark where he enters and where he leaves. We meet Deputy Maeve Hart at sunrise with the ledger, the pictures, and the box from the piano. We ask her to bring a warrant big enough to cover a lie told with lights. That deputy'll come if she believes you," Virgil said. "She believed me once," Iris said, and there was a warmth in her voice that sounded like a past without regret. "She'll believe me again if I bring her something she can hold." "Then let's give her a country's worth," I said. We worked back to town by the long way, Ranger ranging left and right with the steady economy of a well-paid scout. We left bits of chalk where wires rose and fell, scribbled arrows on fence posts, tied strips of feed sack to nails like poor man's flags. We cut the whisper boxes in the church and the hotel and the feed store. We left the pump breath alone. We shut the saloon piano by sliding a butter knife through the crack and fishing out the little wooden lungs. Each trick we found laid quiet when we thanked it properly with wire cutters and a calm hand. The town, under our touch, sounded less like a carnival after close and more like a campground at 5 a.m., tired, honest, waiting for coffee. At the rooming house, Iris brewed that coffee on the stubborn boiler after all, whispering to it like, "You whisper to a mule who might kick you for the principle of the thing." Ranger curled beneath the table and put his chin on my boot, all his impatient angles smoothed by work done well. I looked across at Iris, who held her cup in both hands and watched the window the way a musician watches a conductor, ready to rise on a look. I thought of the ledger down in the cellar and the substation's half hum and the meter blinking across the street. I thought of the $100 receipt folded in my pocket, like a leaf pressed for proof that a tree once grew. "I'll walk to Maeve at dawn," Iris said. "You two nap with your eyes open. Won't that bruise their lids?" I asked. She gave me the quarter smile that's worth more than a full one if it's rare. "Don't worry, Mr. Maddox. Your eyes were born stubborn." I wrote a note on the registry, 2 names and 1 dog, paying guests by strange arrangement, and pinned it under the bell with the moth pressed into its sleep. If Crozier came nosing while we dozed, I wanted him to understand that the house could take attendance. Then I lay down on the floor beside the stair, my hat over my face and my hand on the handle of the cutter. The boards sighed. The meter across the street hummed. The town, for the first time all night, felt like it could be trusted to breathe without us counting each breath. Near dawn, Ranger rose silent as steam and stood facing the window. I lifted my hat and met his eyes. He doesn't bark at sunrises or ghosts. He only stares at the thing he knows I need to see. A bus eased down Main as if it had been detuned, paint deep and sweet, chrome wearing somebody else's polish. The Raven and Key decal caught the early light. It rolled past the Mercantile slow enough to learn our names from the dust we'd stirred. Behind the tinted glass, a hat tipped, not to greet, but to measure. The bus did not stop. It turned toward the church, and something inside the walls there answered with a low power sigh that told me Crozier had his morning story set. Wires fresh, fear warmed up. He was bringing daylight to a night he thought he owned. "Let him," Iris said at my shoulder, already dressed for court. "He's never met a morning that wasn't for sale." "We paid ours in advance," I said, touching the pocket where the $100 proof lived. Ranger wagged once, small, official, and leaned his weight into my leg as if to say the town could carry itself now for a little while. Outside, the meter blinked, blue, then blue again. A pulse, not a threat. This time, a promise to keep time honestly until someone with a badge came to set it right. Sun took its time deciding to rise, and when it did, the street wore the kind of mourning that looks honest, even after a night of lies. The bus we'd watched settled in front of the church and sighed like it had carried strangers' secrets all the way from the highway. Doors hissed. A handful of folks stepped down, blinking at Dove's Rest. They wore the canyon edge look, ready to be scared just enough to feel brave later. Elias Crozier came last, tall in a salesman's coat, boots, and too new for the road, he advertised. Hat brim cut to a practiced smile. He carried a leather folio and a silver-topped cane, and he moved with the care of a man who never lets dust negotiate with him. I don't mind a man earning off a good story. I mind a man renting out fear without paying truth its due. Crozier saw our chalk marks on posts, the scuffed church sill, the lantern stubs on the steps, and set his mouth neat as a new hinge. "Good morning," he told his crowd. "Here we stand on a threshold between the seen and the sworn. Dove's Rest hasn't had a heartbeat since the school choked silent, but sometimes," the cane winked, "sometimes the past keeps score." The church door swung on his second sentence, easy as if the words had handles. A cool whisper crossed. The steps. The visitors drew close, not terrified, just willing to buy. Ranger pricked his ears and looked up at me with the calm of a dog who can hear the small motor behind a big voice. Iris stood by the rooming house, dress clean as first light, hair like a midnight river, watching with the kind of patience women use when men are about to bluff in public. Virgil's hat brim showed beyond the feed store, still as a witness saving words for when they'd count. The meter on the mercantile wall gave one slow blink. Blue, then still. Crozier's eyes ticked toward it and away, like a preacher checking his pocket watch. The receipt in my pocket crackled, the county's $100 proof, reminding me I hadn't spent all my payment yet. Friends, Crozier said, steering them toward the church. We begin where power leaks through. We call no spirits, no theatrics. We merely listen and let the place offer what it's willing to risk. He glanced at me and slid his smile on like a glove. Locals, he added, sometimes join. They know the rules. Which rule says you can wire a coffin to hum? I asked, mild as milk. A couple tourists chuckled. Crozier didn't. He dipped his cane toward me, measuring. Every old town hums, he said. The land remembers. Memory don't run through copper unless somebody puts it there, I answered. Your birdhouse under the hotel piano is napping. He turned his smile to the bus as if the paint could vote who narrated the day. Let's proceed, he told his people, and up the aisle they went, because bought fear teaches a politeness you wish cattle could learn. Inside, air cool and staged. We'd cut half the whispers and left the bones. Crozier raised a hand, and someone in his party gasped at the draft near the altar. Ranger drifted down the center, head low, then stopped at a pew end and pressed his shoulder to the wood, like greeting a tired friend. The pew swung, and a narrow door eased back on soft hinges. Behind it sat a box no bigger than a bread pan, slit like the one at the hotel, but smarter, wrapped in burlap, rubbed with dust so the glow wouldn't show. A thin wire ran out and disappeared under the floor toward the porch. Old places make old sounds, Crozier told his audience. We don't question their method. We question their electrician, I said, and cut the wire with the small cutters I keep in my vest. The box sighed and died. Ranger sneezed. A tourist laughed, then hid it with a hand over her mouth. Iris, behind the last pew, met my eyes and gave a nod so small it was legal in any county. Outside, the bus driver leaned against his rig, watching us, the way a cat watches a fishbowl, planning to be hungry later. His jacket bore the Raven and Key decal, and that emblem worked under my skin like a sliver. Virgil's brim dipped. Redundancies. Noted. We were plucking them one by one. Tell you what, I said to Crozier low, we found a ledger with a V and a basket of numbers. We found little ghosts that run on tin instead of sorrow. We found your glove brand on a Polaroid. Keep your crowd if you want, but if you lay one more wire while I'm standing in this morning, I'll walk your cane to the substation and hit it against the law until it rings. He smiled like a latch. You talk like the county belongs to you. I talk like a man who paid his 100 fare and wants his quiet honest, I said. If the county belongs to anyone, it belongs to the ones who don't add fees in footnotes. Crozier turned to his group. Locals, he said, as if I were plural. Always. Passionate. We honor passion. He ushered them to the hotel. Ranger sat for nonsense, and I trusted his judgment more than most committees. At the hotel, Crozier's voice found a hush. A widow, he told them, kept rooms ready for a husband who never returned. On certain mornings, the piano plays the hymn he forgot to teach their child. He lifted the key cover with borrowed reverence. Iris stepped forward, and her beauty did the kind of damage beauty ought to do to a fraud. It stole the light he was using and put it back where it belonged. Rooms are ready because people sleep, she said, not loud but steady. No child, there's me and the hymn's a wheeze in a box you paid someone to hide. Crozier measured her like a carpenter, measuring a board he plans to split. Ms. Beaumont, he said, syrup and respect together. We are caretakers of grief in our own way. You sell it by the ounce, she said. I mop it off the floor. The tourists shifted. Most folks don't want to be part of a scene unless the ticket promised they wouldn't be asked to speak. Crozier sensed it. He clapped once, soft as a teacher calling recess done. On we go, he said, sliding past Iris like he was the one issuing permission. Next, the mercantile. Anomalous power readings for those with instruments. Sir Kane tapped his palm like an unearned gavel. We crossed to the mercantile. The meter's blue pupil watched our approach. Crozier cut his eyes toward it, then toward the alley, counting his spares. Virgil's brim dipped again. We were close to the backbone wire, the secret feeder, the point where his story got its food. Energy lingers in places where... Crozier began. Ranger rose with a low, friendly woof and trotted to the panel where conduit met clapboard. He set a paw against a painted board that had always been too neat. Tail steady, he looked back at me. I slid my knife along the seam. The board gave. Behind it, a second meter sat, dead-faced, glass black as a pond at midnight. A bundle of cable fed it, split and dove into the ground. A little lock held the junction box. The lock wore factory shine. "There's your lingering," I said. Crozier stepped quick, cane between my hand and the lock. "Private property," he said. Words so prompt you knew they'd been rehearsed. Certain pieces remain county-owned. "Tampering is a fine word for fixing what's wrong with simple tools," I said. "You'll want Deputy Maeve Hart. We do." That last bit was a bluff, but morning truth will carry you farther than midnight shouting. Iris folded her arms. Virgil leaned his shoulder to the feed store corner like he'd hold the building up while this truth got born. Crozier marked his crowd, counted heads, weighed refunds, measured how much fear he had in the tank. "An unsanctioned demonstration," he declared, "but instructive." He flicked 2 fingers at the driver. The driver understood. A side panel on the bus, what I'd taken for paint, flipped open to showcases the weight of lies, speakers, wires, a fogger, film coils, white sheets folded to a rectangle. A tourist gasped, finally earning the fear she'd tried to buy. "Sir," Crozier told me brisk, "I run educational tours. Theatrical elements are demonstration tools." Iris laughed once. No meanness, just a clean refusal to let a word. "Be kidnapped. You run fear folded and ready." Virgil straightened. "Mr. Crozier," he said, the Mr. wider than a pasture. "Explain the new trench cut to the creek behind the substation. Explain night work when line crews sleep, or keep marketing grief until a stamp shows." A small thing happened next, and I felt it like a nail driven true. One tourist, a woman, with a sun hat and wintered-over freckles, stepped toward Iris and pressed a folded bill into her palm. "For the rooms," she said. "For the coffee, for telling the truth when the microphone pointed elsewhere." Crowds leaned the way the first brave stork leans. 2 more moved, money in hand, apologies in their eyes. Crozier watched the little tide leave his pocket. His smile didn't change. It just stopped belonging to the morning. "We'll be moving along," he said, clerk fast. "No refunds, educational value delivered." The panel snapped shut. The bus door folded like a book closing on a chapter it disliked. The driver idled. The tourists, half committed to dignity now, climbed the steps. "Bring your deputy," I told Iris under my breath. "Bring her now." "I'm already half there," she said, and I believed she'd been walking toward that office for a year. She lifted her chin to Virgil. "Keep him from burying his wire before she sees it." "I'll be the fence," Virgil said. "You be the gate." The bus eased off, engine a cat's purr rolling into a yawn. The raven carried its key like an answer to a question nobody had the right to ask. Crozier remained on the sidewalk a beat too long, committing the town to memory the way a hunter memorizes where a deer drinks. Then he looked at me and saw I wasn't going to blink. "Mr. Maddox," he said, finally using my name like a hand. He didn't want to shake. In every county I visited, the man who thinks he's found a hero turns out late to his own story. "I ain't hunting hero," I said, "just being on time." He tipped his hat with 2 fingers and walked after his bus, cane tapping the morning into tidy inches. We listened to his engine fade to a kindly distance. The meter blinked once, that same slow pulse from midnight. Maybe it wasn't accusing. Maybe it was keeping count until we were ready to admit the number we were on. Iris faced me, daylight telling truths moonlight only promised. "Maeve will meet us at the rooming house," she said. I sent word before the coffee finished. Boiling. He always comes on a Tuesday. Fierce spends on weekdays and he likes banks open. You ever think of leaving? I asked. Every day, she said. Then I sweep. Somebody has to teach the floor. It's still a house. She glanced at Ranger. He taught me that. Ranger wagged, dignified, handing out diplomas. I scratched his ruff, and he leaned his weight into my leg like an oath. Tell the truth, carry cutters, pet the dog when he earns it. We walked back slow. Virgil peeled toward the north edge, promising in his quiet way to stand between Crozier and any hurry. I felt the sun warm the receipt in my pocket and remembered how the title of the day had started in my head. We paid 100 to stay in an empty town, and the dog wagged at a lit meter. It didn't feel like a title now. It felt like a ledger, line at the top of a page we hadn't finished writing. At the rooming house door, Iris paused as if listening for something she never admits out loud. You hear that? Just the kettle settling into itself. Good, she said. I like when things asked to work too hard learn to rest. She opened the door and led us into her small kingdom where the broom had the authority a badge. Burrows. Ranger rolled onto one hip under the stairs and sighed in that just right way that says a dog trusts the people he's with more than he trusts the air. I hung my hat on the peg and set my cutters on the counter. When a badge came through that door, I wanted empty hands that had done honest work. Outside, the meter hummed like a clock in a quiet room. Not loud enough to call you, just steady. Enough to keep the hour. If a town can feel watched over by something that isn't a person, maybe this one chose a small blue eye to keep time until a human one showed. We waited with coffee and clean floors and a patience that didn't need to sell a story, because the story had already bought us, and we meant to deliver it to whoever could pay it forward with law instead of lanterns. I poured a sip of coffee. On the step, the way my mother wet the porch before a storm, steam rose like a small blessing. Across the street, the blue eye blinked once, slow as a nod. It felt less like a trick and more like a clock promising to keep time till the right hands. Set it. Iris's coffee hadn't gone cold when the knock came. 3 calm taps that sounded like a badge asking to be invited, not a boot asking to be feared. Ranger lifted his head and let out a low hello. I opened the door, and there she stood. Deputy, Maeve Hart, neat as a new bill, holster quiet, eyes that weighed a lie without needing to unwrap it. Hair pulled back for work, handsome in a way that wasn't soft. Out here, a pretty face that looks you in the eye is rarer than rain in August. The rest of her said, professional. Mr. Maddox, she said, like the town had remembered my name for her. Miss Beaumont? She nodded once at Ranger. And the working man. He writes the minutes, I said. Ranger thumped the floor twice as if to confirm accuracy. Maeve stepped inside and let the door shut. You sent for me with strong words and soft proof, she told Iris. Let's see if we can trade the soft part for hard. We showed her the biscuit tin ledger, the Polaroids, the birdhouse lungs, and the burlap-wrapped whisper box. She didn't gasp, just lined them up on the registry and let her eyes travel like a creek until the right thing was reached. Crozier's bus? She asked. He's circling, Iris said. He favors the hour before lunch. Folks are easier to spook when they're a little empty. Maeve's mouth did the smallest math and came up with law. All right, she said, we'll do it straight. Virgil Pike's north. We'll meet him at the substation. Photograph what needs photographing, follow the trench, and then we'll let Mr. Crozier talk himself into a corner and stall while my warrant runs. You already called? I asked. I don't bet my badge on one horse, she said dry, but I keep a saddle ready. She flicked her eyes at me. And I keep spare cuffs in the glove box in case a tourist gets brave. We crossed Main as a dust devil lost interest. The mercantile meter blinked like it had promised to keep honest time until we returned. Ranger took point, muzzle working, shoulders easy. With Maeve walking sure, the town felt less like a stage and more like a place folks had stepped out of to cool down. At the fence gate, Maeve didn't bother the fake lock. "Seen those since I was 12, she said. "My uncle used to chain. The smokehouse with a padlock that opened like a handshake." She palmed the chain free and waved us through with 2 fingers and a glance. Virgil waited by the chewed-up panel with a pocket notebook and a knife-sharpened pencil. He tipped his hat an inch to the deputy and didn't waste words. He reached into the panel's ribs and touched 2 wires that hummed like hidden bees. "Morning, Ms. Hart," he said. "You want music or numbers?" "Both," she said, answered, eyes warm but not melting. "Start with the trench." We skirted the substation to a scar of earth toward the creek bed. Virgil had laid a board over a section and weighted it with 2 rocks, like a book a man means to finish. He lifted it. The ground looked back like a jaw pried open. Inside ran fresh cables in a corrugated sleeve, wet with last night's condensation, stamped with factory letters that hadn't had time to fade. "Installed within the month," Maeve said. "No permit pulled. If the county did it, the county forgot its own stamp." "Crozier's boys," Virgil said. "They like to borrow the county letterhead on Thursdays. Looks real until you read the numbers that don't match." Maeve crouched and took a photo with her body camera, then another with a little flat point and shoot she pulled from her breast pocket. "Redundancy," she said, more to herself than anyone else. "It's what honest work and good cases both require." She pointed downstream. "Where's it go?" "Past the stand of salt cedar," Virgil said, "then under the old footbridge. After that, it dips into the gravel and sets up an off-books tap at the bend." "Let's see the bend," Maeve said. We moved along the weeded path, ranger scouting, tail talkative but not foolish. Iris walked beside Maeve. The picture was all bearing. The creek was down to a clear ribbon with polite banks. Someone had stacked a rock apron near the bend and made a box out of the river's patience. Virgil pointed to a steel nipple snugged into stone, hose threaded and tightened like a man who refuses to let water be itself without a meter. "Off-books tap," he said, "feeds a header under the feed store. From there, it jumps and splits till the mercantile meter can pretend it's innocent." Maeve took photos. "You leave it alone?" "I leave it breathing," Virgil said. "If I cut it, he'll bring a generator with a smile and call it a repair, then bill it to the county with a weeping letter about preserving heritage." Maeve stood, dusted her knees, and looked at Iris. "You tell me in your own words why you're still here." Iris's eyes didn't flinch. "Because this is mine without a deed," she said. "Because empty isn't the same as gone. Because I can sweep and it matters." Maeve nodded once. "Not praise, not nothing." "All right," she said. "Back to town. I want to pull his bus apart while the coffee's still warm." We topped the rise and saw the Raven and Key bus. The tourists were standing in a shaded clump, listening like it was a hobby that paid. Crozier had his cane tipped and his voice pitched for Sunday. He saw Maeve walking like a decision and smoothed the smile he used for county fairs. "Deputy, Art," he called, as if they'd lunched together last week. "We're conducting an educational experience about the—" "You're conducting commerce without disclosure," Maeve said, not increasing her volume by a hair. "Driver, open every panel. Sir, set that cane down. Folks observe, but don't get under my boots." The driver looked to Crozier. He nodded once. Panels lifted like eyelids, wire, foggers, sheets, small amps, line coils, a rack of battery. Packs with a note. "Charge at hotel outlet before dusk." Maeve photographed the note, then the outlet strip mounted with new screws behind the rear wheel well. "You got permits for public performance?" she asked, not looking at him. "Deputy," he said smoothly, "this is demonstration, not performance." "Then demonstrate your receipts," she said. "Insurance, too. And while you're at it, explain the trench from the substation to the bend, and the off-books tap with the county name spelled wrong." Crozier didn't let the air go silent long. "These are technical matters," he said. My office maintains files. I maintain the ground under your shoes, Maeve said. She bent, picked up his cane with 2 fingers like a delicate lie, and leaned it against the bumper. Leave that there. Ranger sat by Maeve and looked at Crozier, polite, worse than a growl. Iris stood on the hotel steps, dress bright as a promise made to yourself. Virgil held the feed store wall and narrowed his eyes to slits that saw more than most folks with both hands over their brows. A couple of tourists drifted toward Iris with folded bills and embarrassed smiles. One of them, Frecklehat, asked if the rooming house took regular bookings that didn't come with a ghost. Iris said yes, with the kind of yes that plants a stake and gives it a name. Mr. Crozier, Maeve said, I'm detaining this vehicle and contents pending a warrant. You may call counsel. He tried a softer angle. Deputy, I admire your zeal, but we both know small towns need revenue streams. I bring money. I bring interest. If I color the edges of a story to make it legible, is that so wrong? Maeve didn't blink. Edges keep a picture honest. She set a hand on the door. Step back. He did. Not far, but enough that the day could reach his boots and scuff them with fact. She keyed her radio. Heart to county. Holding bus at Dove's. Rest church. Request expedited warrant on suspected utility theft, fraud, misuse of county property. Send Clark Simmons. She listened. Copy. The driver tried to close one panel. Maeve turned her head just enough to stop him with a look. He left it. Open. Ranger yawned, slow and soundless. We crossed to the mercantile meter. Maeve crouched, tapped the glass, then looked along the conduit to the painted board Ranger found. This the door? It's the door, I said, and slid the blade again. Behind it, the second meter waited with its dead face. Maeve set a small seal across the junction box and took a photo. No one touches this, she said. When the warrant lands, we open it proper and let it sing. Deputy, truly we're allies, Crozier said, warmth up another notch. I preserve interest, you preserve order. We could have been done by now if you'd told the truth when you first learned how, Maeve said. Step back. He did, and his cane at the bus looked lonelier than a lie that outlived its use. Morning sharpened, shadows cut cleaner. The bell rope moved a little. Virgil drifted north to stand between the bend and a bad idea. Iris wiped a thumbprint off the hotel desk. The radio popped. Hart, Clark Simmons, warrant signed, ETA 5. Maeve's eyes didn't celebrate. They just got simpler. Copy. Thank you. She turned to Crozier. You'll stand by. He lifted both palms in surrender made of habit, not conviction. Of course. Moments later, the bus coughed, not the engine, just a throat clearing behind a curtain. Ranger's head came up and he stood, muscles a set of quiet questions. A curl of fog rolled from under the bus and lay lazy along the street. Maeve stepped forward, but before she reached the panel, a faint pop sounded from the wheel well and a smell of sweet chemical rose, like a field pretending to be lilacs. Driver, Maeve barked, hands where I can see 'em. The driver froze, palms up. Crozier smiled like a man watching rain walk away from his picnic and saying it never meant to stay anyhow. Maeve looked at me. Mr. Maddox, kick the fogger away from the tire. I towed the canister into clear air. Ranger nosed the fog once and sneezed in protest. Maeve snapped photos, then slid the canister into a small fabric sack. Evidence, she said, and contempt, if I can prove timing. The church door gave a soft thump, not wind. Iris and I both turned. Someone had eased it, nearly shut from the inside. We'd cut the whisper boxes, but there were still the ordinary sounds a building makes when a person who doesn't belong is too proud to tiptoe. Maeve jerked her thumb at the driver. You don't move. She drew her sidearm with a smoothness that didn't scare me because it wasn't meant to. It was just grammar, subject, verb, object, spoken by a woman fluent in her job. "Mr. Maddox," she said, "walk with me. Miss Beaumont, you behind us. Ranger, you're on you." Ranger wagged once, like a trooper answering roll. We moved toward the church, not fast, not slow. The meter hummed behind us, the way a clock tells a kitchen it's time to set the table. The morning had become the kind that makes truth feel both heavier and easier to carry. And as we reached the threshold, the shadow on the other side made one wrong move, the kind that comes from a person who believes a good story can still outrun the facts if he gets the first word in. The meter hummed once, steady, blue. The church door eased open on Maeve's palm, quiet as a held breath. Ranger slid in at her knee, tail level. A young man in a charcoal jacket stood halfway down the aisle with one hand near the bell rope and the other near his belt. He had the look of a calf that just found out the gate moved. "Don't touch the rope," Maeve said. "Don't touch your belt. Just listen." He froze. Ranger pressed his chest against the man's shin. Not a bite, not a threat, just punctuation. "I worked the bus," the man said. "I was just tampering," Maeve said. "Name, Cal Parker." "Tools, wire cutters, soldering pen, reels," he said. "Under the pew." Ranger thumped once with his tail and planted himself by the third pew on the left. Maeve reached under, came up with a tied tool roll and a little black velvet box. She set both on the altar like a correction. "Phone," she said. Cal handed it over. Maeve woke the screen without smudging. "Vent fogger if she holds you," she read. "Stall 10, and tell the clerk our office has the invoice." "Who's she?" Cal stared at the door. "Deputy. I'm just the driver when I ain't the tech." "You're a witness now," Maeve said. "Outside." We stepped into a sun that meant business. Clerk Simmons arrived with 2 canvas folders and the stride of a fence that doesn't gossip. She took one look at the bus panels, the fogger in a bag, the tourists on the porch, and the way Ranger watched. The driver, and nodded to herself as if a list on the inside of her eyelids had just lined up. "Morning," she said to all of us. And then, to Maeve, "Warrants in the bag. Mercantile first." "Mercantile," Maeve confirmed. Simmons broke the seal and opened the junction box. Inside, a shiny bypass grinned up, copper new and tape fresher. A counterfeit county stamp tried. Too hard. A second line tagged "Feed A" dropped into dirt instead of the street. "Photos," Maeve said. Simmons shot them like a drummer keeps time. "Stamp's wrong," she added. "Retired set. Missing the nick on the C." "Clerk," Crozier said with smooth weather. "Our subcontractor." "Sir," Simmons answered, pencil in the air. "Stand by." We trailed Feed A behind the hotel to a false plank in the freezer room. Another small meter sat there with the county letters backward and 2 fogger starters clipped neat to a shelf. "Same serial run," Maeve said, checking pictures. She turned to Crozier. "You've been dressing up fear and billing it as history." He shrugged, pleasant. "Experience is a form of preservation." "Truth preserves itself," Iris said. "It just needs sweeping." "Deputy," I said, "we have devices, the clerk's eye, and a creek drafted into a private payroll." Maeve nodded. "Elias Crozier, you're under arrest for suspected utility theft, fraud, and misuse of county property. You have the right to..." The bus driver twitched. Ranger took 2 strides and set his teeth gently on the man's sleeve, a warning as polite as a handshake. The driver stopped learning ideas for the morning. "Good boy," I told Ranger. His tail gave the hymn beat. Simmons posted a blue notice on the windshield. Virgil stepped out of the feed store shadow with 2 photos of the bend tap and a strip of counterfeit caution tape. "Judge can meet us by 1, Maeve said after a radio call that sounded like a recipe for order. "We'll open every panel under supervision." The tourists didn't scatter. They gathered by the porch. Breckle had said, "I'd like a room that doesn't come with a ghost." Iris said yes in a way that named a future. Someone asked for a broom. She handed it over. A low grind rolled down from the north. Portable generator sound. Virgil lifted. His chin that way linemen listen to distance. If he's got any spare hands, they'll try to throw us dark before the judge arrives. Maeve looked at us. Pike, Maddox, take the dog. Bring me whatever is humming. We cut along the fence. Ranger wrote the wind like a letter. Dust flags rose ahead, and then the flatbed came into view. 2 men, one hugging a generator, the other with a hose coiled to a pump head no county would bless. The creek kept its small, stubborn music. "Howdy," I called. "You hunting permission or forgiveness?" "County business," the driver said, "which is what you say when you don't have paper." "I'm the county that says stop," Virgil said. Ranger sat in front of the flatbed. The driver tapped the brake. The hoseman looked at his boots and decided they didn't owe Crozier that much loyalty. "Here's how it goes," Virgil said. "Generator on the ground, hose coiled, name who sent you, then you walk with us." "Day hire," the hoseman said, hands up. Guy in a suit at the bus said, "Get it running and don't answer questions." "Name?" "Lyle." The driver said after the judge left they'd be back by sundown. "Not today," I said. "We brought them back the long way so the creek could watch." By the time we hit Maine, Simmons had arranged the evidence with numbered tags, like a quiet parade. Maeve finished reading rights in a grammar that didn't spill. Iris brewed fresh coffee. Tourists set cups down and took notes with their eyes. The meter winked once, blue, steady, as if counting the hour for the record. "Set the generator there," Maeve told the men, pointing between the bus and the mercantile. "Stand where the shadow won't be tempted to hide you." She glanced at Crozier. "Your assistants make better witnesses than you make history." He didn't answer. His smile had gone where it was welcome. Virgil checked the bend and gave the all clear. Simmons photographed Fide from both sides and printed a receipt on a little battery printer she kept in her bag like a secret weapon. "Chain of custody," she said. "Lunch can wait." Cal, pocket lighter now that his phone had turned into a confession, leaned against the church rail and studied Ranger the way a student studies a teacher who grades in ink. "He always that gentle?" he asked me. "He saves mean for snakes," I said. Cal nodded. "Wish I'd met him before I met that bus." Maeve heard that, and something in her face changed a hair, approval without sugar. "Mr. Parker," she said, "you're going to write what you know while it's warm. Clark will witness. You don't have to be brave, you just have to be accurate." He took the clipboard like a man receiving honest work. The tourists watched without gawking. Iris stood in the doorway of her rooming house, dress bright against old wood, a picture that made the town look almost dressed again. She swept once, then stopped, as if to tell the floor it could rest because the day had picked up its own weight. The judge's sedan showed at 1:30 with a dust halo and a young woman in a blazer carrying a social calendar for boxes. We opened panels, lockers and junctions under eyes that signed checks with law next to the date. We found more wire, lists, a burner phone, spare stamps, and a ledger with the words "Raven Ride" on the cover in fancy script that tried to be a future. Simmons numbered, Maeve bagged, the judge initialed. It all felt like watching fence posts go in straight after a winter that tried to bend them. Crozier kept his manners. He kept them even when the cuffs clicked, even when the driver looked small, even when the tourists chose Iris's porch over his patter. He kept them because some men think manners can substitute for truth. They can't. They're just nicer shoes for the same walk to a car that doesn't ask your opinion about where it's going. When the cars pulled away, bus sealed, flatbed, parked, generator tagged, the street exhaled. The blue meter blinked once more and then held. Virgil took off his hat and wiped the rim with a thumb. "You can hear the place settle," he said. "I can," Iris answered. "It's the sound a room makes when a lie stops walking across it." Maeve checked her watch. "We're not done," she said, "but we are standing on the right side of the ledger. Tonight, we'll finish cutting the talk boxes, and tomorrow we'll let the county crew reconnect the pump honest. After that, Miss Beaumont, you'll get your inspection. If you pass, you get your printout and your right to charge for coffee with your own name on the receipt." Iris's smile wasn't big. It was accurate. "Yes, ma'am." Ranger leaned into my leg, satisfied in a way simple creatures get when the complicated world chooses simple rules for a few hours. I scratched his ear. "We paid 100 too. Stay in an empty town," I said to no one and everyone, and the dog wagged at a lit meter. Guess the change from that is worth more than the bill. That afternoon, we worked a slow circuit and let the town tell on itself. Up in the bell tower, we found a pulley with a thumbprint of wax rubbed into the groove. Makes a door sigh from a tug 3 buildings away. Behind the grocer's counter, a mirror had been set crooked to throw a moving light when a switch turned. We straightened it, and it showed only ourselves, which is harder to be afraid of, but still worth respecting. Under the hall stage, a square of plywood hid a tray of old coins and a tiny motor that rattled the tin. Maeve photographed, then looked at me and said, "You ever notice how most hauntings are the sound of somebody who couldn't mind their money?" I said I had noticed, but not that neatly. At the schoolhouse, a warm projector sat aimed at a blank wall. A loop of film froze on a frame with a faint child scrawl in the corner. Names that hadn't been spoken in 20 years. We didn't run the reel. Iris knelt, pressed her hand to the floor, and her face changed in a way you keep to yourself. "They're gone," she said, half to herself. "They were gone before he got here. He only taught the silence to sell tickets." She rose and brushed off her skirt, beauty sharpened by purpose. "We'll use this for a reunion board instead. Names want to come back honest." By the time the sun reached the hotel sign, Maeve had a list that would satisfy any file cabinet. Simmons scanned it on her portable and made duplicates. Virgil swapped 2 cracked bushings on the pump because leaks offend him. The tourists fetched water, held doors, and learned to hang a broom right. It's a funny thing how folks who came to be scared will settle down to be useful if you let them. At last, we stood in the middle of Maine with our pockets full of lint and receipts and a day full of decisions that would still be good tomorrow. Maeve wrote Iris a temporary clearance to host the night under the porch lights. Food, coffee, no hard liquor, till the stamp printed. "I don't bend," she said, signing with a neat hand, "but I can lean while the ink dries." Iris laughed and said that was a kind of mercy towns forgot they were allowed to practice. Night came. The last of the tourists claimed rooms and the porch steps and the music of ordinary talk. I mended a hinge for Iris. Virgil tuned an old radio and found weather and a baseball score 2 counties away. Ranger lay by the mercantile door where the blue meter threw its little badge light across his paws, and I liked the look of it. Maeve stayed till the stars were out. She made 2 more notes and 1 quiet call, then looked up Maine like a rancher checking fence before sleep. "You'll have me again at sunup," she said. "We'll finish the unthreading and let the county throw the Maine back proper." She paused, then added, "And Miss Beaumont, I'll be here with the inspector. Bring your boiler, it's manners." "It knows company," Iris said, smiling in that modest way that makes other folks remember their own better habits. "It's liked you since you knocked." When Maeve's taillights faded, the street held quiet without tricks. The meter blinked once more. I sat with my back against the post and felt the boards breathe. I thought of the title that brought us here. We paid 100 to stay in an empty town. The dog wagged at a lit meter, and now the meter was still lit and honest. That was enough story for one dark, right there. Evening came with enough light to tell the truth and enough dark to show where lies sat. Maeve parked the cruiser with its nose toward Maine and laid out the plan like fence posts in a straight line. We take every whisper box. We throw the Maine to county spec. We walk folks through the tricks in one pass so they don't have to. Wonder later what was real. No fireworks, no speeches, just work. That's a language I speak. Iris passed out rags and flashlights. Virgil brought a tool bag that had lived half its life in mud. Ranger did his own inventory. Nose to door jams, one poor tap for a hinge that might complain, a considerate look at the broom as if asking permission to ignore it. Tourists who'd signed Iris's ledger stood back on the porch with coffee, watching like neighbors while a roof gets fixed. The blue meter at the Mercantile glowed, steady, less like a warning now and more like a clerk at a counter, ready to ring up what belonged to the day. We started at the church. Maeve set a folding table on the steps, and Simmons arranged the first exhibits, the burlap wrap box, the bread pan speaker, the fake stamp, the feed, a ribbon, each tagged. She made a chalk sign that said how it was done, and another that said how it will be. It felt like a small-town museum run by the same person who knows which breaker to flip at Christmas. Inside the nave, we lifted floorboards where dust told us which boards had been bothered. Ranger paused at a loose nailhead and put his nose to it like he was tasting gossip. I levered the board and found another cousin of the birdhouse. Same tin lungs, same cheap wire, same glue. Iris held the bag and Maeve held the light, and Virgil cut the wire with a grace that comes from long days installing what other men swear won't fit. We worked like that aisle by aisle, a quiet procession that honored the building by unburdening it. A church is a kind of story. Treat it rough and it remembers. It won't thank you. Back on the steps, Maeve explained in that patient voice. People trust when they forgot how to listen. Air pushed through a slit, wire under steps, timer on a thrift store device. No spirits, just men and a budget. Folks nodded the way you nod when a magic trick tells you it was always your own eyes failing you and not the law of the world. Next, the hotel. Iris unlocked the freezer room, and we took out the small meter with the backward letters. Maeve placed it on a tray like a pastry no one should eat. She pointed out the new screws on the outlet strip, the fogger starters clipped like ornaments, the extra conduit painted to match old walls. Crozier's crew wanted this to look more haunted the longer you stared, she said. That's why the paint is too tidy. That's why the screws are too shy. She looked at me. Cut the painted board. I did. Behind it, another junction with a counterfeit stamp. Simmons photographed while Ranger sat in that interested way he has when electricity is behaving. He knows when a line is live, and he respects it like a horse respects barbed wire. No fear, no arrogance, just the math of not touching what bites. We moved to the Mercantile and stood beneath the blue meter's watch. Maeve waited for Simmons to confirm her seals and then turned the main off with a deliberate official hand. Dark stepped forward like a guest. She checked her phone's flashlight, looked at Virgil and nodded. "Bring it, Honest," she said. Virgil threw the bypass into a bucket with a clank that sounded like a closing statement. He spliced the legitimate run with the care a man uses when he knows a pipe will only love you if you ask it nicely. We waited while he tightened, taped, and checked his own work twice, because you can't call a thing fixed until it cooperates under the second look. He straightened, wiped his hands on a rag that used to be a shirt. "Throw it!" Maeve lifted the main. The meter blinked once, paused, and then spun like a clock that knows it's been forgiven. Lights stepped back into Iris's front room. The hallway lamp, the kitchen bulb, a little amber sign Iris hung without hope. The town felt taller by an inch. "Ladies and gentlemen," Maeve told the porch, "Dove's Rest is live under county spec." She didn't do triumph. She did accuracy. It landed better than shouting. We kept walking. At the feed store, a mirror set to throw fake glints found its true angle and gave back exactly what it had taken. Our faces, our hats, the polite fatigue of people ending a day right. In the hall, a plywood square hid a tray of coins rattled. By a small motor, Maeve unplugged it and let the coins sit still as artifacts again. At the schoolhouse, we found a projector and a loop. Iris stood with one hand on the chair back and read the names written in the corner. She didn't play the film. She held the names in her mouth a second like a sip of water people forgot they were allowed to drink and said, "We'll put these on a board. Folks can sign the ones they remember. No selling feelings." The blue eye on the mercantile wall kept the beat, steady as a metronome without strictness. Ranger sat where its light reached and blinked along. A firefly copied him. Even bugs know when a day is assembling itself into a good story. Crozier watched all of it from the curb in cuffs, an officer at each elbow. He had shifted to the style of man who knows manners have become a contract he'll be graded on. "Deputy," he said once, "I can connect you with a program that helps small towns monetize." "Mr. Crozier," Maeve said, "you're done talking to me until your counsel is paid and present. If you want to talk to the mirror, there's one behind the feed counter. It tells the truth eventually." He tried the tourists, but they'd moved on to clapping when the kitchen bulb came on and to borrowing a screwdriver to fix a porch chair that learned to wobble. Turns out the surest way to take an audience away from a storyteller is to hand them a chore worth doing. Night laid down. The air cooled into a flavor I can only call reprieve. We circled back to Maine and made one last sweep. Simmons compared her list to reality and raised her eyebrows at how well they matched. Virgil checked the pump. "She'll hold," he said, and for all the dust and wire, it sounded like a benediction. Then the trouble came small, the way good trouble starts. That little amber sign in Iris's window flickered and gave a shy pop, not a dangerous pop, just a tired bulb. The sound made Ranger tilt his head and made me glance at the meter because I couldn't stop myself. The blue eye stayed steady. The needle kept time. The hum was normal. Still, the hair at the back of my neck stood with a memory it had earned earlier that day. How men who sell fear like to stage their finales. "Anyone else hear that?" I asked. "Bulb," Virgil said. "Cheap filament." "Sure," I said, "but listen." A second pop, this one from the church side. Then a light thumped in the hotel hall like a fist wrapped in cloth. Maeve didn't draw. She didn't unholster a flashlight like a gun either. She just reached into her vest for the little radio and said, "Heart, sound check east to west." The two deputies posted at the ends of Maine answered with calm clears. Ranger walked to the middle of the street and stood square. His chest went out a little, making room for brave lungs. He looked toward the alley between the mercantile and the feed store and gave a single, friendly woof. Friendly means, "I smell you, and you don't scare me yet." We followed his nose. In the alley, a gray extension cord ran like a snake that couldn't commit to sin. It crossed the gap, climbed the feed store stair, and slipped under a door that had sworn earlier it was done with hosting stagehands. Maeve knocked once, with her knuckles. The door answered with a slow resistance that sounded like boxes not meant to be there. She looked at me, then at Virgil. "Up," she said. We went up. Ranger pressed behind my leg in that close way he uses when halls are narrow and men might be foolish. Maeve shouldered the door and it gave. Inside was a stack of plastic crates, labeled with tape, foggers, spare reel, panels, hiss. Somebody had made the mistake of remarking every shelf, and somebody had made the mistake of leaving the power strip live. A timer blinked the way cheap things blink, overconfidently. "Late show," I said. "Throw it," Maeve said. Virgil did. The timer died like it had been embarrassed. The cord went limp, and the room breathed once, purely in relief. Maeve tore a strip of county tape and sealed the door, then wrote a note on it in neat caps. "Locker inventoried under warrant, return by appointment only." That should have been the end, but ends often come with someone claiming one more minute. On the landing, Cal Parker, free but not free, watched but not cuffed, stood with his hands in front of him the way a man who wants to signal sincerity stands when he has none to spare. "Deputy," he said, "there's one more box they use sometimes, under the stage at the hall. It kicks on when temperature drops, scares folks into thinking midnight has a different voice." "Show me," Maeve said. We crossed to the hall. Ranger went first, nose near the floor, tail floating level like a plumb line on a patient day. Cal pointed to a trap. Virgil lifted it with 2 fingers and a grunt. Underneath sat a tin pan with a bimetal strip and a little striker that tapped whenever the night cooled. Cheaper than electricity, meaner than fire, stupid as sin. Iris stood with her arms folded, not mad, just disappointed in a way that makes you wish you'd done better. Already, Maeve bagged the striker and set the pan upright on the stage. That's the last of them? She asked. That's the last I know, Cal said. He had us keep a spare of everything in the bus, but you got that. He looked down, at Ranger and then up at me. I thought I was making theater, he said, and I guess I was. Only the ticket price was people not trusting their own ears after. Then make better theater, Iris said, not unkind. Make the kind that asks for trust and then pays it back. He nodded, and I saw what Maeve had heard earlier when she told him to be accurate. He wanted out of the habit of lying for a living. That's a long road. Roads like that start in rooms where dogs breathe easy, coffee stays hot, and the law doesn't shout because it doesn't have to. When we came back out, the porch had turned into a small picnic. Somebody had found a guitar with 2 strings that still meant it. Someone else brought out a pie that had been waiting in an icebox all year. A couple from the bus asked Iris if they could help put sheets on beds, and she let them. Generosity is work if it's honest. Maeve took off her hat for the first time, all day, and rubbed her temple with 2 fingers the way people do when their brain feels like a wrench. She put the hat back on and smiled at no one in particular. You can sleep here, Iris told her. I will, she said. I don't like to leave while a day is still deciding what it means. We lit the porch lights early. The blue meter hummed. The church sat a little relieved with its windows open, and the hall, empty of pans, magnets, and cheap tricks, smelled like varnish and sawdust, the way a place smells when it's willing to be rented out for weddings again. Ranger's eyes went half-lidded, which means he is listening to everything at once and storing it under the label safe. I sat on the step and let my back find the old contour of the post, and the night let me, and that exchange felt fair. Near midnight, a breeze slid down Main. It carried creosote and a note of someone far away cutting an apple in a kitchen with a screen door between her and the night. The strings found a simple chord without apology. Virgil tapped his boot on the floorboards. Maeve closed her eyes for 3 breaths. Iris stood with her hip against the jamb, like a woman who has owned a threshold long enough to know how to forgive the feet that cross it wrong. Tomorrow, Maeve said, not opening her eyes. We'll put the pump back under a signature that has a pension behind it. We'll call the utility. We'll give the judge a list that reads like a bedtime story for honest men. And after that? I asked. After that, she said, we start calling the people who forgot this place had a forwarding address. She smiled toward Iris. You got rooms? I've got rooms, Iris said, and a sign that says so. The meter blinked once and held. Ranger thumped his tail 3 times. The cadence he uses when a job is done, but a night deserves to be kept company a little longer. I rubbed his ear, and he leaned heavier into my boot. Somewhere in the dark, coyotes did their census and chose not to bother us. The clock in my pocket said tomorrow's name out loud, and the porch agreed, and no one argued with either. We had unhaunted a town, 1 wire at a time, and put it back on a map that includes coffee and hot water. The rest would be counting and work and names remembered. Bill, Iris said softly. I looked up. She watched the meter and then me. Thank you. Don't thank me, I said. Thank the dog and the county and your broom. She laughed, a small sound like mercy. Then I'll thank all 3. She reached down and scratched Ranger under the chin, and he allowed it with the formal gravity of a man accepting a medal he didn't expect. The guitar found another chord. The windows of Dove's Rest held their reflections without fear. And What little was left of midnight stepped back to let morning look in from a ways off, like it planned to be kind to a place that finally did its chores. Before we turned in, Maeve asked for one more small thing. "Show them," she said to me, "how a meter tells the difference between theft and thirst." So I did a rancher's lesson on the porch. Tapped the glass, pointed to the dial that jumps when a fogger lies, the drift when a pump just breathes. Folks leaned in, learning the rhythm. Iris held up the crooked mirror from the mercantile and let it catch the porch lights truthfully. The tourists laughed at their own faces and didn't flinch. Cal took the little striker from the hall pan and handed it to a boyish man with a notebook. The man clicked it once and then put it down like a bad opinion. Virgil, who hates speeches worse than leaks, said one sentence, "Close enough is the same as wrong if the creek pays for it." And that landed like a post in wet concrete. We signed Maeve's incident sheet on the hood of her cruiser. Witness. Lines, chain of custody lines, the kind of honest boxes that make the morning easier. When it was done, the meter gave one slow wink and settled into the night's even breath, and I felt the town say it back, settled, counted, waiting for morning with its eyes open. The porch breathed with us. The meter kept time. Dawn came, like it wanted to apologize for all the late nights we'd given it before, pale and ready, as if to say, "Start clean." Ranger had slept with his paws under the mercantile eave, where the blue meter could put a little badge light across his back. I woke with the simple happiness of someone who knows which door the day will use. Iris was already up, hair pinned, dress pressed, the kind of pretty that lingers after work instead of before it. She poured coffee and listened like a landowner. Listens to fences and rumors. "Inspector at 8, she said. I gave the boiler a talk. "She listen?" I asked. "Better than most men," she said, and one corner of her mouth performed an unadvertised kindness. Maeve came out of the small room Iris had made ready for her, uniform fresh, eyes farther than the porch and closer than my knuckles. She checked her notes, the way some folks check their heart rate, and flipped a page that already knew what would be written on it by lunch. "You sleep?" Iris asked. "I argued with a list," Maeve said. "Then I slept on it and won." She glanced. At Ranger, working man, brief the morning. Ranger put his chin on her boot, then wagged once in a way that could be taken down for the record as confidence. Virgil drifted up from the north, hat trimmed by the sun, like a coin with an honest edge. He carried a set of printed photos in, a sandwich bag, the creek bend sitting between the plastic like a patient witness. The tourists who'd stayed were slow on the steps, wearing last night's smiles sanded down into contentment. Frecklehat had traded her city posture for porch shoulders. She turned a cup in her hands as if remembering it did more than warm finger bones. At 8 sharp, a county sedan rolled up with an actual inspector inside, Ms. Koenig, short, precise, eyes that believed in both form and function. She shook Iris's hand like she was checking a knot. "Morning. We'll go quick but not hasty," she said. "I know what the day looks like." The boiler hissed when we descended, but the hiss held no malice, only history. Iris patted its side with all the faith a woman can lend an object that has disappointed her in front of guests and yet deserved one more chance in public. Maeve and Koenig worked the valves like pianists who had decided to play the same hymn without counting. Off. Pressure rose, held, stepped down, held again. No leaks, no tricks. Koenig marked a box with a small, satisfied sound a stove makes when it gets the right pan put on it. "Kitchen," she said. Iris had kaolin white walls and a floor scrubbed to a tired shine. Koenig lifted a pan, inspected a handle, tapped a burner with a knuckle. She looked in the icebox, checked a thermometer whose red line shared its report with equanimity. Fresh seals, safe temps, knives stored with good manners. Full marks to the broom. In the dining room, Iris's table wore a clean cloth like a statement. You could seat a truth there and it would sit straight. Front, Koenig said. Signage. Iris held up the temporary clearance Maeve had written last night. Koenig read it, nodded at the neat hand, and pulled a stamp from a case that looked like it had graduated from a better school than I did. Ready to open, she said, and pressed the stamp down as if to nail a board in place for a roof to trust. It sounds foolish, maybe, but when that ink kissed that paper, I heard the town gather itself. Ranger lifted his head. The blue meter on the mercantile wall blinked once, timing the moment with its even pulse. Iris exhaled and looked 10 years less determined and 10 years more certain. You can charge for coffee with your own name now, Maeve said. And bread and rooms and the kind of kindness you don't write on a check. I always charged for that, Iris said, smiling. I just never put it on the bill. The inspector moved on. Feed store, hall, church, substation gate, checking what had been set right, confirming seals Simmons had laid true. By 9, she was gone, and the street looked like a street. No bus, no stage management, just windows and doors and the ordinary difficulty of a day. Virgil handed Maeve the bag of photos. He'll plead out, he said. You'll get paper, but paper doesn't pull weeds. No, Maeve said. It just keeps the weeds from billing the... Empty? She tucked the bag with other bags. We'll call the state utility. Have the line crew bless your splices with the pensions authority. They'll enjoy that, Virgil said in his dry way. Nothing sweeter than fixing a thing that someone tried to fix without asking. By 10, the first regulars arrived as if they had always lived here and had only stepped out to find their hats. Men who had once worked the quarry, a woman who kept the school keys. Already, Maeve bagged the striker and set the pan upright on the stage. That's the last of them? She asked. That's the last I know, Cal said. He had us keep a spare of everything in the bus, but you got that. He looked down, at Ranger and then up at me. I thought I was making theater, he said, and I guess I was. Only the ticket price was people not trusting their own ears after. Then make better theater, Iris said, not unkind. Make the kind that asks for trust and then pays it back. He nodded, and I saw what Maeve had heard earlier when she told him to be accurate. He wanted out of the habit of lying for a living. That's a long road. Roads like that start in rooms where dogs breathe easy, coffee stays hot, and the law doesn't shout because it doesn't have to. When we came back out, the porch had turned into a small picnic. Somebody had found a guitar with 2 strings that still meant it. Someone else brought out a pie that had been waiting in an icebox all year. A couple from the bus asked Iris if they could help put sheets on beds, and she let them. Generosity is work if it's honest. Maeve took off her hat for the first time, all day, and rubbed her temple with 2 fingers the way people do when their brain feels like a wrench. She put the hat back on and smiled at no one in particular. You can sleep here, Iris told her. I will, she said. I don't like to leave while a day is still deciding what it means. We lit the porch lights early. The blue meter hummed. The church sat a little relieved with its windows open, and the hall, empty of pans, magnets, and cheap tricks, smelled like varnish and sawdust, the way a place smells when it's willing to be rented out for weddings again. Ranger's eyes went half-lidded, which means he is listening to everything at once and storing it under the label safe. I sat on the step and let my back find the old contour of the post, and the night let me, and that exchange felt fair. Near midnight, a breeze slid down Main. It carried creosote and a note of someone far away cutting an apple in a kitchen with a screen door between her and the night. The strings found a simple chord without apology. Virgil tapped his boot on the floorboards. Maeve closed her eyes for 3 breaths. Iris stood with her hip against the jamb, like a woman who has owned a threshold long enough to know how to forgive the feet that cross it wrong. Tomorrow, Maeve said, not opening her eyes. We'll put the pump back under a signature that has a pension behind it. We'll call the utility. We'll give the judge a list that reads like a bedtime story for honest men. And after that, I asked, After that, she said, we start calling the people who forgot this place had a forwarding address. She smiled toward Iris. You got rooms? I've got rooms, Iris said, and a sign that says so. The meter blinked once and held. Ranger thumped his tail 3 times, the cadence he uses when a job is done, but a night deserves to be kept company a little longer. I rubbed his ear, and he leaned heavier into my boot. Somewhere in the dark, coyotes did their census and chose not to bother us. The clock in my pocket said tomorrow's name out loud, and the porch agreed, and no one argued with either. We had unhaunted a town, 1 wire at a time, and put it back on a map that includes coffee and hot water. The rest would be counting and work and names remembered. Bill, Iris said softly. I looked up. She watched the meter and then me. Thank you. Don't thank me, I said. Thank the dog and the county and your broom. She laughed, a small sound like mercy. Then I'll thank all 3. She reached down and scratched Ranger under the chin, and he allowed it with the formal gravity of a man accepting a medal he didn't expect. The guitar found another chord. The windows of Dove's Rest held their reflections without fear. And what little was left of midnight stepped back to let morning look in from a ways off, like it planned to be kind to a place that finally did its chores. Before we turned in, Maeve asked for one more small thing. Show them, she said to me, how a meter tells the difference between theft and thirst. So I did a rancher's lesson on the porch. Tapped the glass, pointed to the dial that jumps when a fogger lies, the drift when a pump just breathes. Folks leaned in, learning the rhythm. Iris held up the crooked mirror from the mercantile and let it catch the porch lights truthfully. The tourists laughed at their own faces and didn't flinch. Cal took the little striker from the hall pan and handed it to a boyish man with a notebook. The man clicked it once and then put it down like a bad opinion. Virgil, who hates speeches worse than leaks, said one sentence, close enough is the same as wrong if the creek pays for it. And that landed like a post in wet concrete. We signed Maeve's incident sheet on the hood of her cruiser. Witness. Lines, chain of custody lines, the kind of honest boxes that make the morning easier. When it was done, the meter gave one slow wink and settled into the night's even breath, and I felt the town say it back, settled, counted, waiting for morning with its eyes open. The porch breathed with us. The meter kept time. Dawn came, like it wanted to apologize for all the late nights we'd given it before, pale and ready, as if to say, start clean. Ranger had slept with his paws under the mercantile eave, where the blue meter could put a little badge light across his back. I woke with the simple happiness of someone who knows which door the day will use. Iris was already up, hair pinned, dress pressed, the kind of pretty that lingers after work instead of before it. She poured coffee and listened like a landowner, listens to fences and rumors. Inspector at 8, she said. I gave the boiler a talk. She listen? I asked. Better than most men, she said, and one corner of her mouth performed an unadvertised kindness. Maeve came out of the small room Iris had made ready for her, uniform fresh, eyes farther than the porch and closer than my knuckles. She checked her notes, the way some folks check their heart rate, and flipped a page that already knew what would be written on it by lunch. You sleep? Iris asked. I argued with a list, Maeve said. Then I slept on it and won. She glanced. At Ranger, working man, brief the morning. Ranger put his chin on her boot, then wagged once in a way that could be taken down for the record as confidence. Virgil drifted up from the north, hat trimmed by the sun, like a coin with an honest edge. He carried a set of printed photos in, a sandwich bag, the creek bend sitting between the plastic like a patient witness. The tourists who'd stayed were slow on the steps, wearing last night's smiles sanded down into contentment. Frecklehat had traded her city posture for porch shoulders. She turned a cup in her hands as if remembering it did more than warm finger bones. At 8 sharp, a county sedan rolled up with an actual inspector inside, Ms. Koenig, short, precise, eyes that believed in both form and function. She shook Iris's hand like she was checking a knot. "Morning. We'll go quick but not hasty," she said. "I know what the day looks like." The boiler hissed when we descended, but the hiss held no malice, only history. Iris patted its side with all the faith a woman can lend an object that has disappointed her in front of guests and yet deserved one more chance in public. Maeve and Koenig worked the valves like pianists who had decided to play the same hymn without counting. Off. Pressure rose, held, stepped down, held again. No leaks, no tricks. Koenig marked a box with a small, satisfied sound a stove makes when it gets the right pan put on it. "Kitchen," she said. Iris had kaolin white walls and a floor scrubbed to a tired shine. Koenig lifted a pan, inspected a handle, tapped a burner with a knuckle. She looked in the icebox, checked a thermometer whose red line shared its report with equanimity. Fresh seals, safe temps, knives stored with good manners. Full marks to the broom. In the dining room, Iris's table wore a clean cloth like a statement. You could seat a truth there and it would sit straight. "Front," Koenig said. "Signage." Iris held up the temporary clearance Maeve had written last night. Koenig read it, nodded at the neat hand, and pulled a stamp from a case that looked like it had graduated from a better school than I did. "Ready to open," she said, and pressed the stamp down as if to nail a board in place for a roof to trust. It sounds foolish maybe, but when that ink kissed that paper, I heard the town gather itself. Ranger lifted his head. The blue meter on the mercantile wall blinked once, timing the moment with its even pulse. Iris exhaled and looked 10 years less determined and 10 years more certain. "You can charge for coffee with your own name now," Maeve said. "And bread and rooms and the kind of kindness you don't write on a check." "I always charged for that," Iris said, smiling. "I just never put it on the bill." The inspector moved on. Feed store, hall, church, substation gate, checking what had been set right, confirming seals Simmons had laid true. By 9, she was gone, and the street looked like a street. No bus, no stage management, just windows and doors and the ordinary difficulty of a day. Virgil handed Maeve the bag of photos. "He'll plead out," he said. "You'll get paper, but paper doesn't pull weeds." "No," Maeve said. "It just keeps the weeds from billing the empty." She tucked the bag with other bags. "We'll call the state utility. Have the line crew bless your splices with the pensions authority." "They'll enjoy that," Virgil said in his dry way. "Nothing sweeter than fixing a thing that someone tried to fix without asking." By 10, the first regulars arrived as if they had always lived here and had only stepped out to find their hats. Men who had once worked the quarry, a woman who kept the school keys. Even after the district forgot her number, 2 brothers with a small cattle outfit, and the unhurried look of men who won a fight with a windmill once and had quit bragging about it. They ordered coffee and pancakes and told stories about doves, rest that used only the parts of the truth that had names and none of the parts that needed a fog machine. Cal Parker came back with his clipboard and his apology, both smaller. He wore a shirt that didn't have the bus's raven on it. He took a table near the window and began writing on actual paper with an actual pencil, big letters, like a boy practicing. He looked at Ranger and then at Iris. "If you want a poster done for rooms," he said, "I can do one with my own hands. No tricks." "What would it say?" Iris asked. "Rooms," he said, and then, after a beat, "and coffee. That admits it's coffee." "Make it," Iris said. "I'll pay you in breakfast until your conscience weighs the same as your wallet." He grinned without showing off. "Deal." A service truck from the utility rolled up with 2 linemen and a supervisor who smelled like paperwork and ladders. They shook Virgil's hand like he'd made their morning less boring. They checked the substation, changed 2 fuses with the solemnity of men dedicating a modest chapel, and declared the town squarely on the right side of the meter. The supervisor, a woman with shoulders like a barn door, clapped the metal housing with her palm and said, "Live and legal." "Live and legal," Maeve repeated, and the phrase settled on Maine like a flag you don't have to salute to believe in. By noon, Iris had a line. The tourists had turned into guests. The two brothers volunteered the use of a hay trailer for tables. The woman with the school keys asked if the hall could host a Thursday potluck. Someone carried out a fiddle. Someone held a harmonica. And what broke out wasn't celebration so much as calibration, people finding the note of themselves inside a room that had been taught how to hold it. I sat with my hat tipped and my boots a little dusty with someone else's house pride. Ranger watched the edge of the crowd, the way a good shepherd watches a flock that doesn't know it's being guarded. He didn't judge, he just counted, nose and ears marking the story as it unfolded. He got a piece of bacon for his diligence, which he accepted with a solemnity that embarrassed the bacon into acting like steak. Maeve took a call by the post. "Judge set arraignment," she told me afterward. "Clark will keep the evidence warm. County attorney believes in photographs more than claims. We'll put this out without theater." "What about his driver?" I asked. "Charges filed, bail posted, conditions strict," Maeve said. "He won't be working a fogger for a while. Mr. Parker," she tipped her chin toward Cal, "will stay on paper long enough to remember how it feels not to make a noise for money." Iris set 2 plates down in front of us without asking if we were hungry. "You can pay me by telling me how many rooms I'll need by Friday," she said. 3, Maeve said, not looking up from her notes, "and a pot of coffee big enough to make a Sunday stand straight." Iris laughed from her throat, not from her teeth. Done. The afternoon took its shoes off and put its feet on the step. Work moved without needing a whip. The blue meter kept time the way a porch swing tells you how long a story takes. Folks patched a section of sidewalk with leftover mix, and nobody stepped in it, which is the country version of a miracle. Virgil pulled the old piano guts and set them in the alley for salvage. He found behind them a coin from a fair in a year the town had been proud of something it shouldn't have forgotten. He put it in Iris's hand like an apology he had been. Saving on behalf of time, I walked Ranger down to the creek to see if what we'd done in town had reached the water's way of keeping books. He waded fetlock deep and drank, then sneezed, then drank again, honest as a horse. The bend looked less contrived when the false tap was gone. Minnows revised their travel plans. A heron stood on one leg like a letter from the alphabet of patience. I threw a stone and watched the ripples choose which facts to carry and which to cancel. "You thinking of leaving?" Virgil asked, stepping down the bank like a man who once knew his way around wet rocks in the dark. "I'm always thinking of leaving," I said. "It's the staying that sneaks up. Good towns recruit with chores," he said. "Bad towns recruit with noise." He squinted at the water. "Dove's Rest was learning to be bad. You gave it better teachers." "I just cut wire," I said. "Iris stayed. Maeve stamped. You kept the pump breathing when nobody had a badge. The dog wagged at a lit meter and told the truth about a trick." Virgil acknowledged the compliment by refusing it. "You'll get a bill anyways," he said. "That's how law works. That's how towns remember what they owe the ones who showed up." We went back as shadows lengthened and Maine did what streets do at 5 o'clock. It suggested beer or prayer, depending on a man's list. Iris chose a third option, lemonade that tasted like somebody had made it for people they liked. She stood in the doorway holding the tray, beautiful the way a gate is beautiful when it swings clean and keeps wolves from the sheep without having to prove it 2 nights running. The sun fell through her hair like it had paid to be there. Ranger lay at her foot, tail tip ticking like a slow, precise metronome. "Stay the week," she said. "Help me set the rooms and make a sign that doesn't apologize." "I got places to be," I said, because I always say it first. "But I got ears to lend." "Your ears can pay rent," she said. "Your hands too." Maeve cut in with a look that was half amusement, half warning. "Mr. Maddox belongs to the road," she said, "but he is not allowed to flee before." He eats pie. Judge's orders? I asked. Deputy's suggestion, she said. And the suggestion carried the weight of a law that knows people will obey if it recognizes them as human before labeling them as citizen. We ate pie. It was too sweet, the way an apology is sometimes too generous, and I didn't mind. The blue meter blinked and then held as if it were nodding off to a dream where no one asked it to lie about anyone's pulse. Evening again. Second, one in a row that felt like a page, not a trap. The guests drifted to rooms. The brothers dragged the hay trailer back to the lot. The woman with the keys left a chalk message on the hall door. Thursday, bring a dish, bring a story. Maeve filed 2 more notes and retired with the casual dignity of a person who knows her back trail is as straight as her forward track. Virgil returned to the north edge and let the fence line include him in its thinking as night settled the pens. Iris and I were left with the porch and the soft habit of 2 people who have been busy together long enough to tolerate silence without defending it. Ranger dozed in the bigger quiet, a guard who had decided to be a pillow because pillows were what duty called for. Across the street, the meter kept its vigil, blue and honest, one more set of eyes on a town that had turned in its alibis in exchange for receipts. "You'll go tomorrow," Iris said. It wasn't a question, it was the kind of sentence that takes its medicine. "I'll ride a ways," I said. "See if the county looks different from the other end of the map. See if the world's got another place that needs a dog to approve the meter. You'll write, by which I mean you'll think about writing and then show up instead," she said. "Bring friends who don't mind clean floors." "I'll bring someone who knows a banjo," I said. "I make no guarantees about his rhythm." She laughed and the porch agreed. She looked down Main and up the other way, and then she looked at me like a woman who has finished her chores and is finally allowed to be pretty to herself. "Bill," she said, "you weren't wrong to pay for a room in an empty town. You just came early to the story." "The dog wrote the ending," I said. "He signed it with his tail." Ranger thumped once, a little drum roll for a curtain that refused to drop. We killed the porch light. The blue eye kept its modest pulse and the windows held what they had earned. I slept the way a man sleeps when the noises in the night have agreed to mind their manners. Morning would bring mail, and a truck with clean linens, and a call from the county about dates and hearings and bills. It would bring the inspector's final copy and the first reservation from a couple who wanted to be scared and would instead be rested. It would bring someone who had lived here once and needed the room to be the room it had been. Before sleep found me, Iris spoke one more time from the doorway, voice soft enough to fool moths. "You know," she said, "if you'd written down a title for last night and this morning, it would still be true." "I did," I said. "We paid 100 to stay in an empty town." "And the dog wagged his tail in front of a lit meter," she finished, smiling in the dark where smiles do their best work. "Let it be the first line again when you tell it." "It will be," I said, and meant it the way you mean breakfast when you've been up since 4. Ranger sighed the long sigh of a day that had done its chores. The meter blinked once, then once again, keeping time for a place that had carried itself back to the ledger of the living. Dove's Rest didn't feel like a headline anymore. It felt like a town where folks could leave their boots by the door and trust nobody to rearrange them for a photograph. The creek breathed, the pump held. The porch boards remembered our weight and didn't complain. A little wind tested the sign that said rooms and decided it could be taken seriously. And me, I closed my eyes inside a story that owed more to work than wonder, knowing morning didn't need a fogger to be mysterious, or a tour to forgive us for getting here early. Sunrise promised to walk in through the front tomorrow. When it did, we'd be ready, coffee honest, ledger open, broom leaning with purpose, and a blue eye on the wall counting our luck at the same pace our hearts could stand.